O'Malley, Director with Environment New Jersey. And I'm so excited for all of you to join us to discuss the Delaware River watershed map, showing the peril and promise for the watershed. I wanted to spend just a few minutes just introducing some of my colleagues, just talking a little bit more on kind of why this project is so important for the watershed, both for advocacy and educational outreach, and then a little bit more on kind of what to expect over the course of the webinar. So just to start off, as just a point of information, we are recording the webinar. I've had a few individuals that really did want to join this morning and for a variety of reasons could not, especially if you're joining and find this is useful and want to share with your colleagues. We will be distributing not only a link to the map, of course, but also a recorded version of this webinar, which I think you'll find really useful to share with colleagues. So just to introduce some of the other members of the broader Environment America and State Environmental Group team, we're joined by John Rumpler, who's the National Clean Water Program Director for Environment America, as well as Tony Dudzik, who's the Senior Researcher for the Frontier Group, who is the principal author for making this map a reality. So I obviously wanted to thank both John and Tony for all this work, and thank you in advance for the presentations you'll be giving. Also, as a point of information, we'll have an opportunity for people to obviously interact via the webinar. For those of you that aren't familiar, there's a way to kind of to weigh in with questions. So you will have an opportunity to do that a little bit later on. So I wanted, and I think it's important to note too that this is a project, obviously both Environment America, Environment New York, Environment New Jersey, and Penn Environment, stretching the watershed. And when we think about kind of why this project now, I think this is the exact moment of why not only this is the exact moment that we do want to be doing this, because the Delaware River, its entire watershed, has made tremendous progress, but we still have a legacy of pollution, some a little closer in the rearview mirror than we'd like, that obviously threatens the water quality of the watershed. We've made a ton of progress, whether it be Shad Fest in Lambertville or Shad Fest in Fishtown and Philadelphia, whether it be the revitalization of the Wilmington waterfront and the work in Camden and Philadelphia, and then farther upriver in Easton and cities like Bethlehem. So this is the moment to kind of take a holistic view of looking at the watershed, and then also looking at some of the progress that we've made and the challenges ahead. And, some of them are right in front of us right now, and they're challenges and campaigns that all of us are working on, especially through our state environmental groups, whether it be working to stop the rollback of the Clean Water Rule, which the Trump administration continues to move forward with, which will have huge impact across the watershed for protections for our intermittent streams and wetlands, as well as our successful work, which many of you joined, to stop the budget rollbacks and tax to EPA last year. And the report that we put out on Rough Waters Ahead for the watershed. I often kind of think, a lot of this work goes even further back to, the fight over the Tox Island Dam project, which was one of the first projects that we were involved in the watershed in the late 1970s. And then obviously some of the issues we're fighting on right now in New Jersey, like protections for buffer zones for high quality waterways, those Category 1 protections, are mirrored in other states, like the efforts in Pennsylvania for exceptional value waterways. And then finally, the very clear and present danger in front of the Delaware River Basin Commission with the threat of fracking and fracking waste, and the current advocacy to work to ban both fracking and fracking waste throughout the watershed. So, this is the lens that I think we should view, this map. This is a way for us to kind of look, through the telescope very closely at our direct communities and our direct sub-watersheds, but also more broadly at the entire watershed, and get a sense of of the threats that the watershed does face and the progress we have made. Just to briefly review the agenda on kind of where what to expect over the course of the next hour. I'm going to turn it over in just a moment to my colleague John Rumpler, who will do a kind of a quick introduction and just some additional background on the project, and then obviously allow Tony Dudzik, our primary researcher with the Frontier Group, to run through the actual map. And I think you'll find this incredibly enlightening. Tony has spent months and months on this project, and so very excited to give all of you a sneak peek, and then we'll wrap up with 15 minutes of Q&A, and then talking with a final 10 minutes of just some solutions and next steps coming out of this webinar. So with that, I just want to pass the baton to my colleague, John Rumpler. And then, John, if you're talking, we can't hear you, so make sure to remove the mute button.
Well, what do you know, people? Classic rookie mistake. I had the mute button on. So let me start over by, first of all, thanking Doug at Environment New Jersey and all of our colleagues at Penn Environment, Tony and his whole team that have been doing incredible work building this map. And I also want to thank all of the researchers and advocates and coalition partners that did a peer review of this map and of our analysis of threats to the watershed. This really was a team effort. Many of you have joined us today. So I want to thank all of you for that. And then lastly, before I go into the threats facing the Delaware, I would be remiss to not thank the William Penn Foundation, without which this whole project would not be happening. It was their generous support and faith in the need for this kind of interactive map and systematic analysis that really has brought us to today. So, Nathan Boone and the rest of his colleagues at the William Penn Foundation, we can't thank you enough. Why are we here today? Obviously, as Doug said, we really care about the Delaware River watershed, the drinking water supply for 15 million people, home to wildlife and so many recreational activities, as well as other important values to our communities up and down the watershed. But of course, all of those values really depend on clean water. The water has to be clean. And as Doug mentioned, there are a series of threats to the watershed. And you can see on the slide in front of you that on our interactive map, which Tony will go through in detail in a minute, we've outlined 4 major pollution threat areas. And, we could have grouped or categorized these differently. Different people do it. But really, we thought of these as runoff pollution, both from agribusiness as well as from development, fossil fuels and mining, both the legacy and current operations, industrial pollution, both point sources as well as legacy toxic waste sites, and then, of course, sewage. I mean, just the reality of the matter of dealing with human waste in such a high populated area is a real challenge in terms of wastewater for the watershed. So let me just go through a little bit about each of those problems, and then I think I want to move on to the most exciting part of our webinar today, which is to have Frontier Group talk about this incredible map resource that we've been able to create. But runoff pollution, I think, is by far one of the most vexing and pervasive problems for the watershed. Quite simply, when you put pollution on the ground of some sort or another, whether it's nitrogen and phosphorus in manure from factory farms or pesticides from row crops or all kinds of oil and grease and toxic materials on impervious surfaces in urban built-up areas, and then it rains, all of those pollutants flow off into nearby waterways, into streams and tributaries and rivers that lead into the Delaware River. And so this is a really, really pervasive problem. Just a couple of quick facts that I've put here on the slide that you can see, just quick examples from our research that, for example, agriculture puts an estimated 571,000 pounds of nitrogen into the headwaters of the Tolpahawken Creek each year. And then on the urban, kind of impervious surface side, 60% of the Philadelphia Schuylkill sub-watershed is covered by impervious surface. So that's a real challenge if you're trying to have that stormwater, not run off into a nearby river or creek. On fossil fuels and mining, I mean, we know there's a legacy of acid mine drainage throughout Pennsylvania, and some of that is in the watershed. But there's also a huge number of pipelines and oil trains and refineries that crisscross the watershed. And of course, Doug mentioned the millions of gallons of toxic wastewater generated by fracking in the Marcellus Shale nearby. Definitely something we want to permanently close the door to at the Delaware River Basin Commission. And thirdly, industrial pollution. I can't emphasize enough that, people don't think about point sources enough anymore, but the reality of the matter is there's more than 660 facilities with direct discharge permits, more than 2,500 hazardous waste sites across the entire watershed, including 126 Superfund sites. So while we don't think about this source of pollution as much perhaps as we do about runoff or fossil fuel infrastructure, it is real, it is out there, and many of these Superfund sites and hazardous waste sites are accidents waiting to happen. Just look at what happened in Texas last year after the huge storms and how Superfund sites were overwhelmed and contaminated entire neighborhoods. We certainly never want to see that here on the Delaware River. And then finally, sewage, obviously a persistent problem. We've got 250 sewage treatment plants, more than that release 36 million pounds of nitrogen, 2.3 million pounds of phosphorus each year in the watershed. So again, these are just examples of these four prototypical problems. But I think what we were thinking as we started looking into these problems and starting to think about not just what the solutions are, but how do we engage the public and get folks to see at the sub-watershed level, at the Brandywine Creek level, at the Schuylkill River level, at the Wissahickon Creek level, et cetera, to be able to see these pollution sources and understand on a local level where they're coming from and how they impact their daily lives. We thought having these facts that I have on this slide here is just a good starting point, but it doesn't really engage people about right where they live. That's the power of the map that we have, and I'm going to turn it over to Tony so that we can begin to see how this interactive map analysis can allow people throughout the river watershed to see how these pollution problems show up in their neighborhoods and where they get their drinking water.
All right. Thanks so much, Sean, and thanks so much to everyone for joining us today. As John said, my name is Tony Dudzik. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst and Associate Director at Frontier Group. We are a nonprofit research and public policy organization focusing on environmental protection, consumer protection, and good government issues. I am a native Pennsylvanian and former resident of the Delaware River Basin who is now working in Boston. And for the next few minutes, I want to give you a quick tour of the interactive map, and then we'll be available for any questions that you may have. So by way of overview, this map brings together more than a dozen data sets from local, state, and federal governments on categories of activity that pose potential threats to water quality in the Delaware River Basin. Why bring all this information together in a map? I think as John had mentioned, one reason to do this is that it enables residents of the region to get a new appreciation for the wide range of activities with the potential to affect water quality in the basin, including in their neighborhoods and along the waterways that they care the most about. But perhaps more importantly, and something I think that we really discovered in the process of doing this project, is that the map enables people to make connections, to connect pollution problems in their local waterways to sources of that pollution, to explore the upstream impact origins of problems that affect downstream communities, and to see the connections between, for example, the production, storage, transportation, and refining of fossil fuels, which are problems that we often appear isolated to us, but to see them as part of larger systems that threaten our environment in a wide variety of ways. So let's get started and talk about how to use the map. So when you first visit the map, you're presented with the outline of the basin, showing the waterways that have been listed as impaired for water quality by each of the states. in their integrated water quality assessments. If you want a quick primer for how to use the map, the How to Use This Map button in the top bar provides a little bit of guidance. But there are really three ways that we anticipate that folks within the basin will interact with the map. The first is by searching for the location of their home or a place that they care about. In this case, we will choose a iconic structure, iconic location within the basin, Philadelphia City Hall. And when you choose that location, the map will take you, will show you the sub-watershed, the local watershed in which that location exists, as well as the local watersheds that are upstream of that location. And by illustrating the connections between your local waterway and those upstream, we hope to drive home the idea that the Delaware River watershed is an interconnected system. Another way to explore the map is by selecting your water provider from the list provided. We'll go a little bit upriver and look at Trenton. And when you select your water provider, it will show you the watershed or watersheds from which your drinking water is sourced, as well as the sub-watersheds or local watersheds that are upstream of that location. I want to note that the map only lists those systems that draw water from surface water sources. While groundwater is an important source of water in much of the region, and while there's often a nexus between groundwater and surface water quality, it was just not possible for us to integrate that information into the map. A third option for interacting with the map is to simply use the pan and zoom features in the map to visit a part of the watershed that you care about or that you're curious about. Now, the red lines on the map show waterways that have been designated as impaired in integrated water quality reports. For those of you who are familiar, and if you're on this call, you probably are with those reports, you understand that those reports are updated every 2 years to list waterways that are not supporting their designated uses for a variety of reasons. While we were able to obtain GIS data for all of the Delaware River Basin states, which enables us to actually project this information on the map, not all of the states update the geographic information on the same 2-year cycle that they update the integrated water quality reports on. And so some of the states have data for previous assessment cycles. However, for those states where the source of data is the EPA, we provide a URL which enables the user to copy and paste and link to an EPA website that provides further information about the water quality challenges that are facing that waterway, including the causes of impairment and where there are TMDLs that have been completed, which show the state or region's strategy for addressing water quality issues in that waterway, links to those documents as well, so that residents of the area can dive in and find out more information. Once you've selected the portion of the basin that you want to explore, you can dive into the various sources of data on the potential threats. If you're the kind of person who appreciates sensory overload, you can simply check the select, deselect all boxes to see all of the thousands of data points from within the basin that we've aggregated at the same time. For most users, this is going to be a little bit much. It's going to be quite overwhelming, specifically at the watershed scale. And so zooming in locally can actually make things a little bit less overwhelming and enable you to focus in on the portion of the watershed that you care most about. This view also gives us the opportunity to talk about a couple of features of the map. So first, clicking any point or line on the map yields more information about that particular threat or source of pollution. The information that's available in these pop-up boxes depends on the type of facility and the data that was available, but often includes the name of the facility, some information about the pollution that it releases, as well as, in the case of the impaired waters layer, a link to a website that provides more information about that particular facility or site. A second feature that's important to understand is that for each of the potential threats, categories of potential threats, there's an information pop-up that provides broader context about why that particular source or potential source of pollution is meaningful within the basin, as well as, in some cases, links to outside studies or research that provides more context and information on how things fit into the big picture. One can also choose to interact with the map by looking at individual layers and focusing in on particular categories of potential threats. So let's take a look at some of the information that's available on the map. The fossil fuels and mining layer shows facilities that produce, transport, store, or refine fossil fuels within the basin, as well as active and abandoned mines. Fossil fuel facilities pose risks of catastrophic leaks or spills, or in the case of pipeline construction, the potential for sedimentation or other water quality problems. One of the things that I find most fascinating about this particular layer is that it illustrates the interconnection between different types of facilities, but facilities that we often consider in isolation, but that are part of larger interconnected systems in the fossil fuel supply chain. So here, for example, the red dots indicate petroleum products terminals like this one, the Twin Oaks facility outside of Philadelphia, and also the pipelines and rail lines that support those facilities and which carry fossil fuels through our communities. Where available, we've attempted to provide information about fossil fuel pipelines that are planned or under construction. One thing that I would just note is that with this set of data in particular, and as we'll talk about in future in other categories as well, that we're reliant on the quality of information that we are able to get from state and federal sources. One can also look at industrial facilities that are permitted to release pollution in the basin, and at hazardous waste facilities and hazardous waste sites. For these facilities, we bring together data on both the releases of conventional pollutants, such as nitrogen and phosphorus, based on data reported by the EPA. And in the case of toxics, we report toxic releases as reported by the facilities themselves to the toxics release inventory. In the case of toxics, we use the EPA's risk screening environmental indicators hazard measure, which weights toxic discharges based on the toxicity of the substances released. And because those units can be difficult for the public to understand, we compared the toxicity of those releases with releases from facilities nationwide to provide a gauge of how that facility compares to others across the country. The layer also provides the location of hazardous waste sites that are managed under the federal Superfund program, as well as state hazardous waste cleanup programs. In this particular example, we don't actually have to move very far to find a Superfund site. And as is the case with the impaired waters layer, many of the data points in the hazardous waste sites provide URLs that enable the user to link to more detailed information about that particular site. In this case, being able to look more in detail at the site's environmental compliance and enforcement history. The map also enables users to look at problems that arise at a local and regional scale. In this case, urban and agricultural runoff. I want to note here that the urban and agricultural runoff layers of the map rely on information that's been developed specific to the Delaware River Basin in the form of the Stream Reach Assessment Tool that was developed by the Academy of Natural Sciences at Drexel University, and high-resolution land cover data that was produced for Shippensburg University by the University of Vermont Spatial Analysis Lab. Users can toggle between risks related to urban runoff, as indicated by the share of each local watershed covered by impervious surfaces, as well as loadings of nutrients, various nutrients from agricultural land, again by local watershed within the basin. Lastly, the map enables the user to hone in on pollution flowing from sewage systems. Sewage treatment systems play a critical role in keeping the Delaware River clean and its tributaries. And there have been tremendous advances throughout the basin in improvement in sewage treatment technology throughout the recent decades that have helped contribute to many of the improvements in water quality. However, antiquated facilities continue to be a significant source of nutrients and other pollutants. Zooming in here to look at Camden illustrates that the map enables us to look at pollution releases from sewage treatment plants, as reported to the EPA, as calculated by the EPA from discharge monitoring reports, as well as the location of combined sewer overflows that have the potential to deliver untreated sewage into the Delaware or its tributaries. I hope that by walking through these layers of the map that you can see how a resident of Allentown or Wilmington or a small town in New Jersey or upstate New York can use the map to explore various potential threats to water quality that exist in their neighborhoods and upstream. Now let's talk for a moment about what is not on the map. When we circulated the beta version of the map for feedback, we got a lot of suggestions of additional features to add, and I'm sure those of you who are looking at this now are probably coming up with additional ideas of your own. There are also some potential threats to water quality in the basin for which there either isn't good publicly available information or that are simply hard to depict on a map. There's limited information available, for example, about contaminants of emerging concern, things like household chemicals and pharmaceuticals, as well as the location of factory farms and manure storage facilities that can pose a threat to waterways. In addition, data on the use and runoff of pesticides can be difficult to track and depict in a systematic way across the basin. The absence of these features from the map is not meant to be an indication that they don't matter. It is also important to underscore that the quality of the information depicted on the map is dependent on the quality of information in the original government data sources we used to build it. Throughout the process of building the map, we ran into issues with outdated and inaccurate geographic data, unusual outliers in the data, and inconsistencies in how states report information to federal databases. It is also important to note that state and local governments have differing regulatory standards for many of the types of facilities depicted on the map. For example, waterways depicted as impaired in one state may meet water quality standards in another, while hazardous waste sites thought to require state cleanup supervision in one state may not be included in another state's program. While we hope that this map provides residents of the basin with useful information on local water quality threats, it is also very likely to raise more questions that only improved environmental information can answer. Lastly, in addition to the map, we've included a few other resources on the website to help users make sense of the information presented and to take the next steps toward further involvement. If you click on the Solutions button, it will take you to Environment America's Delaware River watershed page. And at the bottom of that page, there are links to a series of 4-page fact sheets, each of which goes into a little bit further depth on specific categories of threats to water quality within the basin. These fact sheets provide both background information, summary data, suggestions on how to use the map to explore water quality challenges and threats, and also a series of policy recommendations. In the near future, we will be adding to the website a summary report that describes some of the lessons learned from the map and provides a series of policy recommendations in greater depth. We expect that that document will be ready for release in mid to late August. Finally, for those of you who are interested in taking a deeper dive into the sources and methods used in production of the map, there's a PDF with full documentation and methodology for the sources of information that we used in the map. One other feature that I'd just like to point out to folks, particularly the folks who are on this call, is that in the How to Use This Map pop-up, there's a link to provide feedback or to report an issue with the map. We recognize that a lot of there's tremendous expertise and experience in working on water quality issues from many of those of you who are on this call and folks that we've talked about throughout this process. And we really do hope that this will become an ongoing resource that benefits people within the basin as they work to improve water quality conditions. And the way that we can work to make sure that we are addressing challenges or issues that arise in the map, as well as making things more useful for the future, is to get your feedback. And so we would appreciate it if you do have feedback, if you do have thoughts, if you do find bugs or issues in the map, definitely let us know using the feedback survey, and we will be happy to try to address them in the future. I want to just close for a moment by thanking the many people who were involved in making this map a reality, including the William Penn Foundation, the many people, including some on this call, who provided information, advice, and feedback throughout the project, our partners in Environment America, as well as at the Penn Environment, Environment New Jersey, and the other local environment groups. And especially I want to shout out our team at Frontier Group, some of whom have been working on this effort for more than a year, and particularly my colleague Alana Miller, who's on the phone here, who has really helped to make this website and this map as interactive and attractive and informative as it is. I also want to thank you all for joining us on the webinar today, taking a few moments out of your afternoon to join us to learn more about this project. And we hope that you find this to be a useful tool in all of the great work that you are doing to help make the Delaware River Basin cleaner and healthier for its people. So thanks for your time. And I believe that we are going to proceed to questions and answers. And I think that Tappan will
yes.
be able to tell us a little bit more about how that's going to work.
Yeah, so folks, if you have any questions or comments for us now, we'd be happy to take them. You can either use the chat box to type in a question, or if you would like to talk, just feel free to find the button to raise your hand. It should be in the participants box, and I can just unmute you and allow you to talk. See a question from Larry Levine.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Oh, great. So this is Larry Levine with NRDC. First of all, this is really impressive. Thank you guys for doing it, presenting it. A couple of questions, and this may fall into the category of like great ideas that someone else may have already, or I won't give myself too much credit, maybe not great, but good ideas that someone else may have thought of earlier and that you guys decided wasn't feasible to incorporate at this stage. I'm wondering about, you've got the search by drinking water utility function. Is there a way to zero in on the source water area from which that drinking water utility derives its water in order to see the threats that are particular to that drinking water utility's customers from a drinking water perspective?
Yes, that's a great question, Larry, and thank you for asking it. To clarify, the areas that are highlighted are in fact the areas of where the source water comes from.
Not the service area.
Yes, exactly. And I apologize if I failed to make that clear. So in the case of Trenton, it draws surface water from the Delaware River itself. If you wish to look at industrial sources of pollution within that watershed, some of the zooming requires a little bit of work here and there, but you can zoom in and look at particular potential sources and threats within the basin, within that part of the basin as well as upstream communities. So yes, that's a very good question, and thank you for asking it.
Okay, thanks. That's great.
Yep.
I guess another question is, and I think the answer is it's not in here, but I'm curious you're thinking about it. You've got impaired waters listed. I'm wondering whether you had looked into whether there were ways to represent high quality waters, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, anti-deg, the wonks on the phone, those sorts of waters, and to be able to link those up with threats to that could put those in danger of not being so high quality.
Yeah. That's another excellent question. It was something that we very much considered. It came up, I know there were a couple of folks who, in the course of reviewing the beta version of the map, had made that very suggestion. It's something that we very much wanted to do. There are a couple of things that were challenges in doing it. One is, simply, there's a lot in here already, and so we're kind of running toward the end of the process as we considered it. The second thing I think that we struggled with, quite frankly, in the process of doing this is, how to represent the waterways themselves. And so, we would, I think, need to have multiple layers of the map to indicate both high quality waterways and those that are impaired. So it's an excellent suggestion, and I think, to the extent that we work to build on this in the future, that would be one of the things that we would really hope to add, because it's an opportunity to illustrate to folks in the region where those waterways exist in a way that I think would be really very useful. Yeah. So it's an excellent question and suggestion, and thank you.
And is there, last thing I'll just ask, is there any thought towards having further iterations of this that could incorporate additional things like that?
I think we would certainly aspire to doing that, and we can talk about it further. I think our focus right now is on beginning to introduce folks into this particular iteration of the map.
Thanks very much.
Yep.
We got a couple comments in the chat box. One from Adam at River Network, saying that they were asked to put together a mapping application to show exactly the one of the maps, and I believe this is the excuse me, I'm just pulling this up. This was in response to one of Larry's comments, a map on high quality designated uses. I'll go ahead and share that for everyone in the chat box. And then another question from Karen is this mobile friendly?
I don't believe at the moment that it is mobile friendly. And that it is correct. And it's really challenging to use on a very small screen. I think we should also, the resource that was just shared by the River Network, I think would be a great thing for us to make sure that folks on this call have available to them, if we can find a way to do that. And I apologize if you were seeing my screen going back and forth. It's always a logistical challenge to do these kind of webinars.
If folks have other questions, please feel free to raise your hands or type something in the chat box.
Thanks, everyone. If there are other questions that come up, this is John Rumpler again with Environment America Research and Policy Center. If there are other questions that come up, we would encourage you to tinker around with the map over the next couple of days while this is still fresh in your mind. We're going to, and perhaps we didn't make this clear enough at the beginning, but we're actually going to be doing the official public launch of this webinar for the, rather of this map for the media next Tuesday, also at 1 p.m. So we're sharing this with all of you as key allies and stewards and advocates for the watershed, but the official release for the media and the general public is next Tuesday. Just so you all know. I do want to close out, if I can, for just a minute to talk about solutions. I think that oftentimes we look at the enormity of problems that we're facing. As you could see when Tony clicked all of the different pollution sources across the watershed, it just became overwhelming. And we suddenly think, how on earth are we going to grapple with this problem? But the truth of the matter is we know what the solutions are in many of these places. And in many of these places, we've made progress using these solutions. We just have a lot more to do. So if we were to just walk through the different sources of pollution we were talking about, I mean, sewage treatment plants, we know, number one, we need to upgrade and repair the aging and antiquated ones. Number two, we need to prevent combined sewer overflows by preventing runoff pollution at the source. Speaking of runoff pollution, this slide in front of you here has some more detailed bullet points of, again, many of the things that we know can make a real difference. Expanding the use of green stormwater infrastructure. I know that many of the organizations on this phone, us, as well as River Network, as well as Larry, your shop at NRDC, have done a lot of work to promote the use of green infrastructure, some of it very simple, rain barrels, rooftop gardens. In fact, I saw this morning on the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, one of the partners there is doing a training with youth volunteers on how to install a rain garden. That's fantastic. We need to multiply those efforts 1,000-fold across the watershed so that we can capture this stormwater. We do need to shift to more sustainable farming practices, away from industrial factory farms and huge row crops that require intensive fertilizer, etc. Strengthening requirements for pollution capturing buffer zones, again, a way to prevent pollution before it gets into the water. Funding is so important. Many of you on this phone are involved in efforts to restore actually pieces of the watershed on the ground, land conservation. The sewage treatment plants are going to require money for upgrades, whether that's federal, state, or from ratepayers. One way or another, it needs to happen. And then lastly, touching on the question that Larry Levine asked, absolutely, we need to not only be cleaning up the pollution that's there, but to keep the waterways that are clean, by extending protective designations under the anti-degradation provisions of the Clean Water Act and relevant state statutes. Doug was a little bit modest in his introductory remarks, but Environment New Jersey played a key role in helping to get designations, Category 1 designations, for over 900 miles of reservoirs, streams, rivers, etc., across the state of New Jersey. We need that kind of robust visionary effort across the Delaware River watershed. So these are just some shorthand bullets for some solutions, especially to the runoff problem. I talked a little bit about sewage. I mean, industrial pollution, obviously, if we're going to clean up those thousands of hazardous waste sites and the 126 Superfund sites across the watershed, we're going to need to make sure that Superfund is funded. Put the fund back in Superfund, hold polluters accountable as well for cleanup. All of those things make common sense. We've known them for some time. So again, we're going to be coming out with a more comprehensive policy recommendation document in the next few weeks. Some of you have provided us feedback on that document, and we really value it. I don't think there's going to be anything in there that's a big surprise to those of you who have been working as allies and advocates in restoring and protecting the watershed, but we wanted to put it all in one place. And in the meantime, those series of fact sheets on our website that Tony pointed to before are available now with at least sort of this level of bullet analysis towards solutions. And the last thing that I wanted to do before we close out is just to provide people with a couple of resources. Again, here is the link to the interactive map itself. and we're asking you, for sure, feel free to circulate that to within your organization and to other experts and advocates and local leaders who deeply care about the Delaware. But again, our public launch for the media and the general public is next Tuesday. So we encourage you to use that link, but maybe not blast it out to your entire email list until next Wednesday. And then secondly, similarly, is the link to the web page for our Delaware River project that Tony showed you earlier. That's not the map itself, but it's the fact sheets and the overview of the problems and so forth and so on. And then the last bullet there are the policy recommendations document in more detail that's forthcoming. So again, I just want to close by thanking all of you who every day for years and decades have been working to restore and protect the Delaware River. We are proud of our legacy and our role in contributing to that, and we hope that this interactive map provides a new, unique tool that can boost all of our advocacy efforts at the local, state, and federal level to restore this critical watershed and keep it clean from upstate New York all the way down through the state of Delaware. So thanks very, very much. I guess if anyone has any last questions or comments before we close out, we do have a couple minutes left, but we're otherwise done with our planned agenda.
We did have two more comments come in. One was asking if this incorporates New Jersey GeoWeb data from Jay Coffey.
Tony, if you're on mute, I think that one is for you.
Yeah, I've just gotten off mute. Yeah, I think that the detailed questions about the sourcing of the information are in the methodology. I believe in general, we wound up using a fair amount of data from federal sources, as well as data in some cases directly from New Jersey DEP. I can certainly answer that question and get back to you. I don't believe that we necessarily did, but I believe that some of the data that shows up in that application may be available elsewhere, and it might be incorporated in that way. Tappan, did you say that we have another question or comment?
One more comment regarding the river network map from Gail Killam. It's just, she wanted to mention this is still a work in progress, and they currently have Pennsylvania, New Jersey layers in and are getting feedback on different ways to represent the high quality of the map. So just wanted to include that caveat with the link if it's shared with others.
Gail, thanks a lot for sharing that. We look forward to looking at it, and I think I'll just speak for Environment America and our state affiliates. We're very excited to continue to see where we can do advocacy to get more protective designations for pristine and high quality waters in the years ahead. All right, well, with that, I think we're going to close out here. This is John Rumpler with Environment America Research and Policy Center. I want to thank my colleagues, Doug O'Malley at Environment New Jersey, Tony Dudzik from Frontier Group, and all of the rest of our team, the peer reviewers, the William Penn Foundation, everyone that made this project possible. We definitely are looking at this as a living resource. So as Tony said, please, if you find bugs or things that we can reasonably easily improve about the map or ideas for ways to build on this work, we'd love to hear from you.